brought us themselves to get ready for this structure.
Ready, step. Ready. Let's go.
Our nation has remembered its honored dead here at Arlington National Cemetery. You see, we're surrounded with the memories and with the names of men and women down through our nation's history who have heard our country's call to arms, and they've answered that call. And because of their dedication, their courage, and their great sacrifice, they have protected and defended us. They have protected our freedom and our way of life. This afternoon, these elite soldiers in front of you from the Old Guard 3rd Infantry Regiment, together with the United States Army Band, the Color Guard, the Caisson team, the Arlington Lady, all the staff here, all of us are deeply honored to be with you as we say farewell, bid our final respects to your loved one, Kenneth Walker, Brigadier General, United States Army. May I introduce Chaplain Lt.
Mr. Walker, ladies and gentlemen, on this day, 60 years after the sneak attack that brought us into World War II, how appropriate that we come to honor one of those whose bravery and insight helped to bring an end to World War II. We have come today to honor and pay our respects to Brigadier General Kenneth Walker and to celebrate a life that was very, very significant. His memorial stone was placed here in the cemetery this past summer. You can see up there with the flag. But honors were not presented at that time. We hope to rectify that here today. His vision saw the formation of the United States Air Force of today, and his words and plans helped to pave that way. There was an article, October 90, in Air Force magazine called Courage and Conviction. A few words that it said there about what he did. He and other air power pioneers, among them Donald Wilson, Harold George, Hayward Possum Hansel, and Lawrence Cooter, developed analytical systems for determining the key elements of sustained and industrial society, and that were vulnerable to bombing. They concluded that a new era of warfare in which an industrial country could be defeated primarily by strategic bombing lay just over the horizon. It followed that a nation's air arm should be independent and co-equal with the ground and sea forces. These ideas were heresy in the eyes of the War Department General Staff. In 1934, Walker and 4 other tactical school pioneers were invited to testify before the President's Commission on Federal Aviation, which is called the Howell Commission, on military aspects of aviation. The War Department tried by both direct and devious means to prevent their appearance in Washington, but the 5 officers decided to go at their own expense. Their concept of air power was proven correct. It has been said that the Air Force in the past has been the supporting arm of the military. I think we have seen in the past, just days recently, that the Air Force now can be the supported arm. The vision of General Walker was to be able to see that. He could tell then that this day would come. General Walker was, as a lieutenant colonel, one of the authors of the Air War Plans Division 1, the plan for organizing, equipping, deploying, and employing the Army Air Force to defeat Germany and Japan. He was commander also of the 5th Bomber Command and developer of the air bombing doctrine. His desire to get it right led him to lead his men and their bombers into combat. Even though extremely dangerous and against the directive of his commander, General Walker knew that if he was to develop proper and accurate doctrine, he could not do so without personal experience in that type of combat. He was also an individual, from what has been shared with me, that had a special love just for the Army enlisted person. I guess it was permissible at the time to go to the chow hall, and if there was a long line there, for the officers to be able to walk to the front. Well, he didn't do that. He would stand in back, but while he was in line, it was told that there was an individual, an officer, that walked past and got into the front of the line in front of everyone else. And according to an eyewitness, General Walker went up, grabbed that individual, and escorted him back. I don't know if they could have had applause right then, but I think within their hearts, there were those who were giving that. That just tells us a little bit of his heart. His desire to have that personal experience in combat led him to be in a B-17 over Rabaul that January 5th, 1943. He never returned from that mission. He and the rest of the crew of the San Antonio Rose, Major Blaisdell, Major Lindbergh, Captain Daniel, Lieutenant Hanson, Lieutenant Hand, Tech Sergeant Craig, Staff Sergeant Blakely, Sergeant Stewart, and Privates Stone and Frazier. They never returned. Because of his great courage, insight, and leadership, he was awarded the Medal of Honor, presented to Ken by President Roosevelt. Must be one of your favorite memories to look back. If he doesn't qualify as a hero, I don't think anybody does. Let me read to you just a part of that citation. For conspicuous leadership above and beyond the call of duty, involving personal valor and intrepidity at the extreme hazard to life. As commander of the 5th Bomber Command during the period from 5 September 1942 to 5 January 1943, Brigadier General Walker repeatedly accompanied his units on bombing missions deep into enemy-held territory. From the lessons he personally gained under combat conditions, he developed a highly efficient technique for bombing when opposed by enemy fighters and by anti-aircraft fire. On 5 January 1943, in the face of extremely heavy anti-aircraft fire and determined opposition by enemy fighters, he led an effective daylight bombing attack against shipping in the harbor at Rabaul, New Britain, which resulted in direct hits on 9 enemy vessels. During this action, his airplane was disabled and forced down by the attack of an overwhelming number of enemy fighters. As a result, he received the Medal of Honor. If you could go up to his gravestone, you might like to do that, although it's a little bit steep. You will see that the words that are inscribed there are actually inlaid with gold. We do that here for those who are Medal of Honor recipients, to honor them in a very special way. Future generations, gentlemen, will visit Arlington and see his memorial stone and know that he served his country with great distinction. For those who are flyers, there is a favorite poem that they like for us to read at times like this. Oh, I have slipped the surly bonds of earth and danced the skies on laughter's silvered wings. Sunward I've climbed and joined the tumbling mirth of sun-split clouds, and done 100 things that you have not dreamed of. Wheeled and soared and swung high in the sunlit silence, hovering there. I've chased the shouting wind along and flung my eager craft through foothalls of air. Up, up, the long, delirious burning blue. I've topped the wind-swept heights with easy grace, where never lark or even eagle flew. And while with silent, lifting mind I trod the high, untrespassed sanctity of space, I put out my hand and touch the face of God. A standard at military funerals since 1891 is the playing of taps. We will do that here just in a few moments. Many people do not realize that there are actually lyrics to taps, and I'd like to read some to you right now. Day is done, gone the sun, from the hills, from the lake, from the skies. All is well, safely rest. God is mine.
just, and I couldn't look and walk at the same time. I had to come home. This year, I took a stab so quick that I could.
Really? You could do it?
Yeah.
Be careful of the slick leaves, too.
Yeah, I know.
That's the problem is slippery leaves under. May what?
40 days.
May the...
Was disappeared and circumstances. Yeah.
How you on?
Drive the vehicle up and around and meet us up,
That'd be
so we
great.
would have to come back
Yeah.
down. Okay?
Now, is everybody going back to the admin building before they go to the...
I'm not sure.
He made photographs and sent them to us.
Everybody, well, the part back here.
Okay.
But the shaft...
Group, and then he took individual.
We're gonna go up.
Okay, well...
He had a sense of humor. He came to visit us in Glendale before. That was lucky, you know, that he could drop by on the way to overseas, because we hadn't seen him a lot before that. But I think we went shopping. He bought us something, I think, and had dinner with us at our place in Glendale, California. But it was a valuable. And then he used to send letters in which he would pretend to be the censor, and he would cut great chunks of the letter out so that it became meaningless. He had a great sense of humor. I just didn't benefit enough from it. You know, I resent that I didn't know him better. But you know, you forgive all that when you grow up and you realize that you value, especially today, you begin to value all his contributions. At the time, I admit I didn't have a big reaction. I think I sort of buried the whole thing, and it really the sense of loss and whatever you're supposed to feel, and I thought I should have felt, didn't come out until something else happened, another death. And then I suddenly realized that it was related to his death. One of those, because I felt a lot of, I suppose I felt a lot of resentment and anger, and wasn't conscious of it. That since he had separated, and we saw him before he went overseas, and he wrote. And I felt good about it, but when he killed in action, I didn't have the feelings that I think were appropriate. I was glad that I could feel it later. But it was delayed reaction. So at the moment, I was sort of. Unemotional, you know. Our local Republican or member of Congress, anyway, arranged for me to go to Congress and meet senators, and he was with me on this trip to the White House, and he joined me there. But I know that when I entered, at that age, you're not really aware of what you're going to see. Roosevelt was sitting behind the desk, but I recall looking back, the main impression I had was of a man who was worn out from his endeavors through the war, which were unbelievable. He read I suppose he read the statement, and I think, as I recall, our only personal interaction was asked me what I would like to do after the war, and I had been talked to by the Republican, the representative, wanted to pass a bill, to put a bill through Congress, which would allow any son or daughter of a recipient of the Medal of Honor to have a fast track to West Point or to Annapolis. So of course I said, without thinking, I said, "Oh, I want to go to West Point." He said, "Good for you," or something like that. I never did. I didn't take advantage of it. Didn't really want to, but that was the one interpersonal connection I could say, other than my general impression. I don't really like ceremonies, and I didn't want to say anything, and I felt mixed feelings, but. I had no mixed feelings at the ceremony. I really felt pride and pleasure that I was being there, and it was great. And I was really admiring my brother's efforts. He's been keeping this whole thing going. You know, the history, the connections. I would have known very little about my dad, and providing people with information like the biographer who wrote the excellent biography, such as it is, because there's not much material to work on. But. Yeah, I think that the fact that there's this part of a continuing military tradition going back in beginnings of the Republic, I suppose. It's a lot to absorb, but I think you can see the value of ceremony. You can poo-poo at those who think we don't need them, and I certainly value it. It's a great thing to be part of it.
My brother and I went to the Los Angeles airport. My dad appeared. I ducked under the rope and ran and jumped into his arms, and which was kind of interesting because I wasn't the least bit inhibited, even though it was only the second time in my life I remember, seeing him. So it was, and my brother was more, more formal in his relationship because he'd grown up with my dad and had a different relationship than I did in a way. Grown up in the sense of he was old enough at the time of the divorce to have had interchanges and an experience that I didn't have. So I was perhaps more free. And in any event, from there, we went to a hotel in downtown Los Angeles. And another memory is the bellman, not the bellman, but the reception clerk hitting a bell and calling for a bellman and calling out bellman for General Walker and Sons. And that, of course, resonated. That made me feel proud. We went up to his room, changed into summer uniform. He had the Legion of Merit, and he was always modest about ribbons. He only wore a few, and his command pilot wings, of course, and his stars. And he bought a bouquet of flowers for my mother, and we proceeded, and I don't again recall whether he even talked about a taxi, but we took in those days there was a streetcar between the Los Angeles and Glendale, and we got on, and all kinds of transportation at that point was always seemed to be crowded. The war effort obviously had an impact on gas already, so people were taking public transportation, and this was very crowded when we got on. It was very crowded, and so we were just kind of wedged our way in and standing up. And another point that was memorable was that over time, people began to realize, kind of look around and see this general officer standing among them in uniform. And it was palpable. Even though people may not have said anything, you could kind of hear the murmur and rustle. And that was, of course, extraordinarily proud. I mean, that meant a great deal to me. And then when we got off, when we got to Glendale, we may have gone to a taxi stand and taken a taxi from the streetcar to our home. I don't remember. But a young man came up to my dad in the street, and he was a teenager, probably in his late teens. And I'm not sure how he addressed him, but I remember that I thought he was not very respectful. And he, I think in current jargon would be, "Hey man, tell me a little bit about, or what's it like to be in the Army?" or something kind of a totally mindless question, totally not picking up who he was talking to. But my dad treated him with total, he wasn't totally nonplussed, and stopped, and I don't remember what he said, but he answered the questions in a very respectful way. And then we went home, and of course he kissed my mother on the cheek when they greeted each other, and he stood in the kitchen door and talked to her while she was cooking. My brother and I kind of hung about, but kind of let them have some time to chat. And we had dinner, which I remember not a thing about, and then a taxi came for him. So it was a wonderful encounter. Rather than seeing him en route to danger and possibly not returning, it was more that I absorbed that day and the experiences, almost the exclusion of the before and the after part of it. To me, it was just a wonderful day. We knew what was going on by his letters, and it kept us abreast his assignment. So we knew it, but I don't think I processed it. I'm kind of amazed that he was able to continue to maintain that level of correspondence while facing this enormous task, because the 5th obviously had been created, really. He was building the 5th Bomber Command from scratch, and the equipment was limited. The men were learning by doing, basically, in terms of their fighting experience. And it was amazing, and his photographs don't reveal a great deal of stress. Kenny, of course, in his book, General Kennedy Reports, there was too much gratuitous criticism of him to the extent that it really wasn't relevant to the story. He talks about my father being a prima donna, but I think all the officers I knew were prima donnas in the sense that they had these strong egos. They fought for what they believed, and but that's a whole other issue. I think January 5th was a Monday. I somehow have a recollection of it being a Sunday when the famous telegram that many Americans received at that point, the Secretary of War or something regrets to inform you, and then the details. It arrived by telegram messenger, in the yellow telegram, and my mother opened it and read it. I don't remember anything about that day except that she bent down and said to me, "Now you won't cry, will you, when I tell you what's in the telegram?" And that says a great deal more about my mother than anybody else in terms of perhaps how she was coping with it. But it was the kind of peremptory request was strange. I'm not sure I would have cried, only because I don't know that I understood. I was 8 or 9, so I was certainly old enough. Well, no, January was my birthday, so it would have been my 10th birthday. A few days later, I don't get the sense that it had an impact, and yet it did have an impact on me emotionally. But I think it was a repressed impact. That the fact that he was missing always at the outset anyway implied that he could be recovered, but he was missing and not dead. And then we received subsequent letters, many letters of both consolation and sympathy, and assurances that every effort was being made to try to find him. And of course, a war was on, and I don't resent the fact that they did the obvious things, and they looked for a while, but they couldn't really go into the jungles and look for him, they had to move on. As I said, there was a war. And so I think that initially my mother might have defeated her purpose by asking me not to cry, because she was in effect signaling that the news was very serious. But I think that the concept of missing in action, I did probably ingest that completely. But I had plenty of time, because then news, he was also in the news a lot, or at least he seemed to be in the news a lot to me. General Rome's plane with he obviously captured the imagination of a lot of journalists and people who were covering the war, and so he received coverage while he was alive, and then of course when he went missing, and then the Medal of Honor. So there were 3 kinds of news-generating developments in that period of time and I really grew up knowing him almost exclusively as time went by through the depiction of him from those sources. I remember picking the blue jacket that I wore, and then it's kind of hazy because it was an open. We were on the tarmac, and the troops were lined. There were an assembly of troops that were formed, and I really, as I recall, was in a kind of what took the place that my dad would have, in that the troops were formed, tension. It was a kind of a classic medal pinning ceremony. I was certainly aware of the stunning quality of everything, and there was no question but what the flyover had an immense impact on me, as it did others. What to me was the cap that really kind of nailed that whole event. made it as memorable as it is. It was very emotional when he walked in the door, because we'd only spoken by phone, and I saw him through the window. I rushed out to greet him. He's such a delightful person, and he's, because I think the real impact that my father had from his point of view, and aside from his individual experiences, was the way that he, by his own behavior, instructed the officers in his command to treat and deal with enlisted men.
I was drafted 3 months before Pearl Harbor, okay? September of '41. And I went through basic down at Keesler Field. It was newly opened, been opened in July. And while I was there, I joined the Air Corps. I was in the Army then. I joined the Air Corps in Atlanta and went to Keesler. And I was assigned to go to school in Fort Logan, Colorado. That's near Denver. And I went out there, and I got there the 1st of December, and I went to hospital at Lowry Field because I had some sort of thing. But the Army always puts you in isolation when you move from one base to another. Okay, so at Pearl Harbor, I was in a ward with some other guys when we got the word, and on the 7th. Got to San Francisco for a short time, went to Angel Island, and 3 passenger liners took us to Melbourne. I was on the Mariposa. That was a big luxury Matson liner. I was at Melbourne for a short time, a few days. Beautiful people. God, we'd walk down the street and this lady came by and said, "Why don't you come in and have tea?" And she took us to this little town called Bacchus Marsh, a little suburb, a little place of Melbourne. Winter time, she gave us tea and cookies, beautiful people. So then we got the train up to Townsville, Ant Hill Plains. We spent about 6 weeks up there. Then we went out to 7 Mile Strip. On the shore at Port Moresby, they told us to go down to Aussie Mess and get something to eat. Old boy and I, named Hobson, we started down the beach, and a Jap Zero came down and caught me right across here. Okay, and I hadn't, I didn't know anything about Purple Hearts. I didn't think about going and get the medics to look at it. I had a lot of bleeding, but it wasn't a big, So General Walker came in as a commanding general, and we were cadre. We organized. I say we organized. Everybody loves to hear about the trip out to nobody to bring the general in. Middle of the night, I went out with a staff car and picked him up. I ran off into a ditch, sort of. General didn't say anything. But about 4 or 5 minutes later, I pulled into a revetment. And he said, "Are we going to spend the night here?" And that's my favorite, not the one going off the road. And he was joking. This was his way. He joked about, and they tell me he would just devil people all the time. But when he asked me that, I felt perfectly at home, perfectly comfortable with him. He was a straight man. He was a soldier. He stood straight, and he was at ease with people. You know about the chow lines. Well, he would always get in the back of the line with the rest of us. I've stood in the chow line and talked to General Walker several times. One time, and I didn't see this one. I don't know this. But it sounds like him. A guy came, a junior officer came up and went into the head of the line. He walked up and took him by the arm and brought him back and stood him in the back of the line. And that's perfectly normal for him. This is the kind of guy. He wasn't there. But these officers in operations and intelligence, they acted as if they were enlisted men, just like we were.
One of the stories concerned him being ordered by MacArthur not to even be in the airplane that day. Another story was he's pioneering a new bombing technique, and he himself wanted to observe the results, get down there with the troops so he could then perfect the application of it. Well, in the process of doing this, I guess I got bit by the research bug, and ultimately found myself doing interviews at associations, military associations of retirees, to get leads to do more paintings. And I got additional leads about General Walker. That was the first clue that I had that maybe General Walker had not died in the crash. I came across a diary of a Wake Island survivor who his widow shared with me at a Wake Island survivors reunion. And in this guy's diary, he had the entry of April of 1943, very late at night. Rumor through the camp was that an American Brigadier General, Army Air Force Brigadier General, was being brought into this camp and being put into solitary, and this was a camp outside of Shanghai. Well, to the Wake Island guys and the 4 Doolittle Raiders who were at the same camp, anyone that goes into solitary in this particular camp does not come out alive, or no one has seen anyone that has survived the solitary part of it. Well, I chased that lead down for about 7 or 8 years, and it led me to the then 1941 British Consul General in Hong Kong, Sir something or other, whose name I forget, was also captured, taken prisoner, and interned by the Japanese on or about December 9th or 10th. And through his memoirs, I was able to follow a trail of different camps this guy was in, all the way up to the same camp outside of Shanghai where these Wake Island and Doolittle guys were at. And in his memoirs, he'd made reference to a Brigadier Walker who was in the camps with him. So this led certainly to a very long chase, which ended in an extremely disappointing conclusion. And the Brigadier Walker that he had made reference to in his memoirs was a British brigadier from the Salvation Army who had been taken prisoner in the city of Shanghai just prior to the start of our entry into World War II. But that did not close the chapter on General Walker, because I had also found out one other tantalizing lead that to this day is still unsolved. And it goes like this. Somewhere about 3 days after the shoot-down of the B-17, the Japanese Army sergeant, who was the sergeant on an anti-aircraft battery, was boasting that his battery was the one that shot down the B-17 carrying the American general. It made sense to me for a couple of reasons. One, there has been no confirmation that the B-17 was shot down by Zeros. There was a lot of confirmation that the skies were filled with a lot of ack-ack that day, and this confirmation came from other survivors of that raid. Now, it's entirely possible that there were Zeros and Oscars in the sky, but none of the survivors that I had corresponded with had indicated that they had shot down any airplanes. As a matter of fact, I think there were 2 that day that went down, and the survivors are attributing them to the ack-ack. So this guy's story, or his boasting, made a lot of sense. On top of that, through Lex McCauley, I was able to get a report that came from Japanese sources that he had uncovered, whereby it said that an American flyer on January 10th or 11th, sometime like that, was wandering through the hills of New Guinea, and he stumbled into a unfriendly native village. These people were very friendly with the Japanese. They immediately called the Kempeitai, or the MPs, and bagged this guy and put him away. And in the papers Macaulay had, it made reference to this person being interrogated, where the Japanese didn't believe anything he was saying. And it led me to believe that it is entirely possible this could have been Walker, who was trying to hide his identity by taking on the identity of somebody else. The Japanese cross-reference to this person was just through the letter B, which was very much unlike other Kemper-tie interrogations, where they would literally make reference in their correspondence to the person's name or rank. This particular one was void of rank and was void of name, and it only referred to this guy as B. Now, coincidentally, you had a captain, I think, maybe a Major Bleasdale, on that same airplane. So I just developed the hypothesis that maybe Bleasdale was the one who actually died in the airplane, and Walker got out. Walker took Bleasdale's identification, was picked up in the village, and tried to speak to Bleasdale's life or Bleasdale's background. Of course, it doesn't sound like the Japanese were buying it. And through whatever means, maybe extracted the fact that he was a one-star general, which gave credence to the Japanese sergeant boasting about it, his battery shooting down the airplane with an American general. How else would a battery sergeant know something like that? So those were the bases for me to continue research, and of course that started in '86, and I think I've never put it down, but I put it down full-time in about '93. I think the clue or the last link that we can put together in this, whether it's me or someone else, I will start doing it again, would be to discover the U.S. Army SIGINT organization that was intercepting Japanese radio communications. If we can find out who that outfit was at the time, chances are, if the Japanese did have a general, as I think, they would have communicated that to Tokyo. And obviously that would have been intercepted. The next question is, could it be decoded if it was a cryptographic message? If it couldn't be decoded, maybe it was a radio message, and maybe it was in the open. So I think the clue lies in the communications. The clue lies in the communication from the Japanese, and it certainly lies in the American, the U.S. Army Signal Corps cryptographic unit who does signal intelligence. If we can find out those two units, or either one or the other, I think we'll find reference to this whole thing. I think that's the clue. I think that's the final clue in this thing.